The zipper of my purse made a sharp, metallic hiss that seemed to echo through the entire kitchen, a sound far too loud for such a small motion. I watched, almost in slow motion, as Lena's manicured fingers dipped into the dark interior of my bag, searching with the practiced ease of someone who felt they owned everything they touched. When she pulled my sapphire blue credit card out, it caught the harsh afternoon light, glinting like a prize. She didn't look at me. She didn't ask. She simply held it up between her index and middle finger, a small triumphant smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "These are for the family expenses now," she said, her voice dripping with a casual, terrifying authority. "Have you ever felt the exact moment your heart turns into a block of ice?" I didn't scream. I didn't even reach for the card. Instead, I looked at Jack, my fiancé, the man whose ring was currently weighing down my left hand, a piece of metal that suddenly felt like a shackle. He was leaning against the door frame of the kitchen, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his gaze fixed intensely on a loose piece of linoleum on the floor. He looked like a man trying to disappear into the wallpaper. The silence between us wasn't just a lack of sound, it was a physical weight, a thick, suffocating fog that filled the room. Behind him, his mother was at the sink, the rhythmic clink of china against ceramic providing a macabre soundtrack to the theft happening in plain sight. She didn't turn around. She didn't tell her daughter to put the card back. She just kept scrubbing, her shoulders hunched as if she were trying to wash away the very air of the room. Outside the window, the Texas sun was relentless, baking the world in a golden hue that felt entirely too bright for the darkness settling in my chest. "That's my card, Lena," I said. My voice was a whisper, a thin thread of sound that barely cut through the humidity. I expected a defense. I expected Jack to finally, for once, stand up and say that his sister had crossed a line. But why do we always expect the people who hurt us to suddenly become the people who protect us? Lena didn't even flinch. She just shrugged, sliding my card into the back pocket of her tight jeans with a flick of her wrist. "You're family now, Emily. Family shares. Don't be so sensitive." She said it as if she were explaining the weather to a child. Jack still hadn't looked up. I studied the top of his head, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, a detail I used to find endearing, but now felt like a mark of a stranger. This silence of his, it was an old friend. I had met this silence a year ago when his father had asked with a straight face why I couldn't dip into my savings to cover his mounting medical bills while Jack found himself in a new career path. Jack had stayed silent then too. I had seen this silence at a crowded dinner table 3 months ago, when Lena joked that I was only with Jack because I wanted a project to fix with my salary. Jack had just took a sip of his water and looked away, and now, as his sister literally reached into my private life and claimed my labor as her own, his silence was the loudest thing in the house. A strange crystalline calm began to settle over me. It was the kind of peace that only comes when you realize the house is already on fire and there's no point in trying to save the furniture. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the scent of lemon-scented dish soap and old grease. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires hope, and mine had vanished somewhere between Lena's fingers and my purse. "Okay," I said softly. Lena's eyes snapped to mine, a flash of surprise crossing her face before it was replaced by a smug, "I won" grin. She glanced at Jack, her eyebrows arched. "See? I told you she's reasonable. She knows how things work in this house." She reached for the refrigerator door, scanning the shelves with the hunger of someone who had never had to worry about the cost of the feast. "We should celebrate. Let's order something big for dinner. Pizza, wings, the works." She pulled my card back out, waving it like a flag. "We'll use Emily's card. It's the least she can do, right?" I didn't move. I leaned lightly against the laminate counter, feeling the cool surface against my palms. I watched as she pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen as she navigated a delivery app. None of them, not Lena, not the mother still scrubbing at the sink, and certainly not the coward in the doorway, had any idea what I had done while the rest of the world was still sleeping. At 7 o'clock that morning, the world had been quiet. I had been sitting on the tiny, rusted balcony of my apartment in Austin, watching the first commuters of the day crawl along the highway in the distance. The air had been cool then, a brief reprieve before the heat took over. My phone had been a heavy weight in my hand, the screen glowing with the blue light of my banking app. For 2 years, that account had been the engine of Jack's life. It had swallowed my salary every 2 weeks, disappearing into the black hole of his student loans, his parents' groceries, and his car insurance because he was between things. I had sat there, watching a single sparrow land on the railing, and I had realized that I was building a palace for people who wouldn't even let me sit in the garden. I hadn't closed the account. That would have been too messy, too immediate. Instead, I had simply moved every cent. I moved the emergency fund I'd built, the wedding savings I'd scraped together, and the daily balance. I moved it all to a new bank, a new account, a place where their names were nothing but ghosts. Then I had made a call. "Hello, this is Emily Carter. I need to place an immediate freeze on my credit card. Yes, the one ending in 4029. I'd like to report it as potentially compromised. And there's one more thing." The call had lasted 5 minutes. 5 minutes to undo 2 years of being a human ATM. Back in the kitchen, the atmosphere began to shift. Lena's forehead creased, a small line of frustration appearing between her brows. "That's weird," she muttered. She tapped the screen of her phone aggressively. I watched her, my heart beating with a slow, steady rhythm. Is it wrong to find beauty in the moment a predator realizes the trap has snapped shut? "What's wrong?" Jack finally spoke, his voice raspy from disuse. He stepped into the kitchen, his eyes darting between his sister and me, sensing the change in temperature. "The card," Lena snapped, her voice rising an octave. "It keeps getting declined. I've entered the digits 3 times. Emily, did you give me the wrong zip code or something?" I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the entitlement etched into the very lines of her face. "No," I said, my voice as steady as a mountain. "The zip code is correct. The card just doesn't work anymore." The kitchen went deathly still. The mother finally turned off the faucet, the sudden silence of the water feeling like a physical blow. She turned around, wiping her wet hands on a floral apron, her eyes wide and searching. Jack's posture straightened, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean it doesn't work? Emily, did you forget to pay the bill?" I almost laughed. The irony was a bitter pill. "I froze the card this morning, Jack, at 7 a.m. Lena's face began to flush a deep, angry red. She slammed her phone down on the counter, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "Why would you do that? We were about to order dinner. You knew we were counting on that." "Because it's my card, Lena," I replied, the words feeling incredibly sweet on my tongue. "My name is on the plastic. My sweat is in the balance, and you took it out of my purse without asking. In what world did you think that was going to end well?" Jack stepped toward me, his hands out as if he were trying to calm a startled animal. "Emily, come on. Why are you making this into a big drama? It's just a pizza. We can talk about this like adults." I did laugh then, a short, sharp sound that startled even me. "Drama? You want to talk about drama, Jack? Let's talk about the last 2 years. Let's talk about how I paid off your private student loans while I was still wearing shoes with holes in the soles. Let's talk about how I bought your father's heart medication and your mother's groceries for months while you looked for the right fit at a job. I even paid your car insurance so you wouldn't lose your license. And through all of it, what did I get?" Jack opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. The floodgates were open now, and the water was cold and fast. "I got silence," I continued, stepping closer to him. "I got your sister making jokes about me being a gold digger while I was literally the only person putting gold in the vault. And today, I watched you stand there and let her rob me. You didn't blink. You didn't move. You just waited for the transaction to go through so you could eat for free again. You're being hysterical," Lena spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You're acting like this is some huge betrayal. It's just a family helping each other." I shook my head slowly, looking at her with a pity that seemed to infuriate her even more. "No, Lena, the betrayal isn't the card. The betrayal is the fact that none of you actually see me. You just see a balance sheet." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable, until the air felt like it was vibrating. "But don't worry. The big part is about to happen." As if on cue, Lena's phone began to vibrate on the counter. The screen lit up with a generic unknown number label. She glared at me, then snatched the phone up. "What?" She barked into the receiver. She listened for all of 3 seconds before her face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. "What? No, that has to be a mistake. I was just trying to use it for a food order. It's my brother's fiancé's card. It's not stolen." She looked at me, her eyes darting with a sudden sharp fear. Without thinking, she hit the speakerphone button, her hand shaking. "Ma'am, this is the bank's high-priority security department." A professional, detached voice echoed through the kitchen. "We received an alert about an attempted unauthorized transaction on a flagged account. The owner of the account informed us this morning that any attempt to use this card should be treated as fraudulent activity and reported to local authorities if the cardholder is not present." Are you the cardholder, Emily Carter? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a world ending. Lena looked at the phone as if it were a live grenade. Jack looked at me, and for the first time in our relationship, I saw something in his eyes other than complacency. I saw terror. No, Lena whispered, her voice cracking. I'm not. I'm right here, I said, leaning toward the phone. This is Emily. I'm with the person who has the card. She took it from my purse without permission. Jack lunged for the phone, but I was faster, sliding it across the counter toward the sink. Emily, stop. What are you doing? You're going to get her arrested. I'm setting a boundary, Jack, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum. Something you should have done years ago. I looked at the woman at the sink who was now weeping silently into her apron. I looked at Lena, whose bravado had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. And then, I looked at the man I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with. I have something else to tell you, Jack, since we're all being so honest now. He stared at me, his breath coming in shallow hitches. What? What else could you possibly have done? This morning, while I was sitting on that balcony, I said, each word a deliberate surgical strike. I also called the wedding venue, the florist, the caterer. I cancelled everything. The mother let out a sharp, choked gasp. Jack's jaw dropped, his hands falling limp at his sides. You what? Emily, the wedding is next month. The invitations are out. People have bought flights. The deposit isn't refundable, I said, and I was surprised by how little I cared about the thousands of dollars I had just set on fire. But honestly, it's a small price to pay to get my life back. I'd rather lose a deposit than lose 40 years to a family of vampires and a man who treats silence like a virtue. I reached over and picked up my purse, slinging it over my shoulder. It felt lighter now, even with the weight of my wallet inside. The air in the kitchen was stagnant, thick with the smell of failure and unwashed dishes. A man's silence is a louder betrayal than any shout. I said it more to myself than to him. I looked at the sapphire card still sitting on the counter, Lena having dropped it as if it were burning her skin. I didn't pick it up. Let them keep the plastic. The money was gone, and so was I. As I turned toward the door, I felt the first real wave of freedom hit me. It was like breaking the surface of cold water after being held under for too long. I could feel my lungs expanding, my heart finding a rhythm that belonged only to me. Emily, wait. Jack's voice followed me, but it sounded small now. Thin. It was the voice of a man who realized he had let the only good thing in his life walk out because he was too lazy to hold on to it. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll make Lena apologize. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I walked through the living room, past the framed photos of a happy couple that now looked like evidence of a crime. I opened the front door and stepped out into the Texas afternoon. The sun was still hot, but the breeze felt like a caress. Cars were moving along the street, people were living their lives, and the world hadn't stopped spinning just because I had finally decided to save myself. I felt a strange, quiet sense of relief, a humming in my bones that told me I was finally moving in the right direction. Trust is a currency you can't print once it's gone, and mine had been spent until the account was empty. I reached my car and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to the ticking of the engine as it cooled. I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight anymore. I wasn't the provider, the fixer, or the silent observer. I was just Emily, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like the sole owner of my own life. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of the power of self-respect, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep sharing meaningful, emotional stories like this. Thank you so much for watching and being part of our growing community.